Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide for smooth recording. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on September 2nd, next week, Wednesday at 5:30 p.m., How to Ask Your DNA Question with Bonnie Belza. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation on 2020 Update, Basics of Findmypast. James has over 35 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy's Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceedingly Glad. He is an author and co-author of over 25 books on genealogical research and has presented at expos and conferences around the US, Canada, and Europe. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. James has 7 children, 34 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. And if James is ready, then we'll turn the time over to him.
Okay, well, welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. This is James Tanner. I'll be presenting on the basics of Findmypast. As Bryant mentioned, my wife and I serve at the BYU Family History Library, which is on the BYU campus in the Harold Bealey Library, and that's Brigham Young University. We are basically doing all of our support from distance, so we are online. If you need support and you want one-on-one support and help on a genealogical question or whatever, any subject relating to that, you can call the library or email the library at from their website. All of the information is on the BYU Family History Library website, and you will be given the name of a missionary volunteer who will be able to help you with your information. And I'm in that list, and if you choose to contact me directly, of course you could do that also. And we'll be helping. Today was my one good day for helping. I had about three people and about a couple of hours worth of support out there from for various people. So we're going to look today at a program called Findmypast.com, and Findmypast is a see if I can get this to go. So let's get started with that and get a look at what we have to do. The first thing I'd like to suggest is that you choose a Findmypast account and start your family tree. This is their current membership, and I'd remind everyone that prices can change. Also watch for sales and promotions. If you get on their mailing list, then you'll usually get an email every week from Findmypast telling you about new records or whatever is going on with the website. But these are subscription websites. I'd like to suggest that you can try these out for free at a family history center. That's the good news. During this time of pandemic, it's not necessarily the best news because all of the family history centers are currently closed. That's over 5,000 family history centers around the world. And the BYU Family History Library, as I mentioned, is closed to patrons, and also the Salt Lake Family History Library. So that's kind of out right now, but it will be in the future. You can get back into the Family History Library and use these programs for free. The upside of that is they are free. The downside is you really can't put your family tree on the programs. So if you're looking for record hints or some other helps, there are library editions of the programs that can only be used for searching and looking. but if you have any questions about the program, that's one way to do it. For those who are members of the Church Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because Findmypast is one of the partner accounts, then you can create a free Findmypast account by going through the process, beginning with Family Search. Go to the Family Search Partner Access or down to the Solutions Gallery, both of which give you entry into signing into these programs for a free account. When you get onto these websites like Findmypast that have the family tree option, it's always a good idea. And the reason for that is pretty simple. A lot of people in the past have questioned me why we would want to have more than one family tree. I've got it on my desktop program. Why do I need it online? That kind of thing. There are some distinct advantages. These programs, the partner programs in particular, and many others where there are family trees, all have advantages. And Findmypast and the other partner programs that I've highlighted in this particular series, Ancestry and MyHeritage, have very sophisticated record matching or record hint features. What that means is that when you have your family tree on a program like Findmypast, the program itself, through their record matching technology, will find record hints for you and give you suggestions of records that may help you to expand your tree or document the people that you already have in your tree. And those record matches are extremely helpful in building your family tree and doing the research. You might as well let them do the research as well. The question, of course, is their subscription websites. So are you going to pay the money to have these records? The question there becomes, here's your time. How valuable is your time? Is time valuable to you, or is you just rather do all the searching yourself? I can also say that the record matching is usually more accurate than a searching that you can do on the websites. So we'll look at a little bit of that, and we'll find out about Findmypast here. Another way of doing this and getting your family tree started is to use a GEDCOM file. I hesitate to recommend this as a really good way of doing. I've done it. I've uploaded GEDCOM files. I've also regretted it because a lot of the information that I've inherited from my family and that is sitting in my GEDCOM family tree is simply not accurate, and it takes quite a bit of effort to get everything cleaned up and get the information corrected. And that what happens when you start a family tree from scratch is that you're doing that from records that you find on the website. So that's the advantage of getting more. It's going to be more accurate as you go along. And I've found this to be very helpful when I'm working with other people. Occasionally, I will have them put a family tree up on the website, or I'll start one for them if they don't have a subscription. And that way, I can use the website to assist me in assisting them in finding records to support their family and extend their family tree. So this is a family tree, what it looks like on Findmypast. Obviously, if you happen to have photos, they may substitute the photos for their little drawings in there. But these people were all born well before photography was possible. And you can see that this is a classic, I would call traditional form of pedigree. You may be more familiar with the horizontal pedigree where you start out with names on and then expand out in sort of the same family tree pattern. What I can say about this particular pattern here is that it's very much more familiar to people who have little or no experience in genealogy. but it is a very efficient way of looking at families, and it has some advantages over the standard pedigree, especially when there are multiple families, because multiple spouses within a family, because it can show more than one spouse at the same time if the program is set up that way. So this is a pretty straightforward way of looking at, and you can add in the people you know about, and just by clicking on the add a person or the plus signs, and you can add in a father, mother, spouse, sibling, or child, and build your tree person by person if you wish to do that. One of the things that you should do immediately when you go into a program like a new program, something that's new to you, if it be one of the online websites or wherever it is to review your profile. You click on My Account in this case, and it will give you some options of entering your personal details, the way that you communicate with the program and with other people within the program. And usually there's a portion talking about my subscriptions, meaning what level I have, if there are different levels within the programs. You saw that the beginning there were 2 different levels in Findmypast. And the subscription, of course, will also tell you whether you're current, whether you owe a subscription fee or whatever. Also, each of these programs that I've talked about so far, and Findmypast is no exception, are associated with a DNA company and provide DNA information through the website if you take their DNA test. Now, each of them have their own. Ancestry has their own DNA test. MyHeritage has their own DNA test. And Findmypast has their own DNA test. Now, Findmypast, as I'll get into in a little more detail in just a minute, is primarily a website based in Great Britain. And it is owned by a Scottish publishing company called DC Thomson. And it has primarily, over the years, has grown into the premier location for records about Great Britain, including Ireland and Northern Ireland, and also many other parts. And I'll talk about that more completely in a minute. So their DNA test is particularly aimed at people who have English ancestors. And so if you have ancestors from the British Isles, this may be an advantage to you to have this DNA test to pick up your relatives and ancestors in the British Isles. You can update your payments, save searches, things like that on the program. Okay, so there's your personal profile and site settings for the program. The next thing I suggest whenever you get into one of these programs is do some exploration. In this case, explore the family tree, look at all of the options on the menus, find out what kinds of things you're able to do. My way of approaching these programs is just exactly that. I sit down there and look at every one of the menu items, figure out what all the menu items and all the links and everything go to and what they do, and that helps me get oriented in a new program. There have been some new programs to the lineup of family search partner programs lately, and so I've had to learn more about these programs as time goes on. All you need to do to see a person's details is to click on their icon. That will bring up a detailed summary of that person's genealogical information. In this case, vital information about born, married, and died, and links out there to their tree. If you click that, you'll put that person in the center of the tree. and then their profile, which is all of the information about that individual, to edit that and adding relatives. And then you'll see here there are already 4 hints available for this person, meaning 4 additional records that have been found that may be helpful. One of the things that that's interesting is that this particular person in my line, Thomas Parkinson, was born in England, as it says right there, but his family emigrated to Australia in the 1850s, and he then joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and got married on the boat coming over from Australia, and ended up in Beaver, Utah. So we have 3 different countries for Thomas Parkinson, and that makes doing his research a little bit interesting, more interesting than it would be. Interesting is my word for more challenging than it would be if he'd lived in the same place all his life, obviously. Now you can also click on the profile and look at their profile page. You'll see it's quite extensive. It has the suggested hints. It has a timeline showing all of the records that have been attached for this particular person. There's kind of a balance here. When I'm presenting on these programs, and particularly on Findmypast, I have to choose somebody that I haven't extensively done everything on. So it may look like sometimes, like now, I have 4 new hints on Thomas Parkinson. And maybe you're thinking, well, why doesn't he just go click on those hints? Well, the answer is if I did, then they wouldn't be there and I wouldn't have that to show. So sometimes it looks like I'm a little bit incomplete. But on the other hand, I have my family tree on all of these programs. So it's not surprising that I haven't taken advantage of all the hints on all the programs because there are lots of hints out there. They're very, very helpful. I cannot understate the importance of using these record hints because all the programs are, let's say, fairly accurate. Some are more accurate than others. You do have to examine each record hint as you get it and determine whether it's your person and whether it applies to your person. And so you need to be careful with the record hints that you do attach. Make sure you don't fall for the same name, same person syndrome, and I'll go through that in a minute here. Now, you can also search the records directly. You can search all the records on the website. And I'm going to go through a search of how that works and why we would do that in just a moment here. So we can look here to search all the records. And then one thing that's really important about Findmypast is that this program is extraordinarily good for helping you focus in on a specific person, particularly when so many of these people have absolutely similar or the same names. It's just incredible how interesting that can become when you have so many people with the same names. And so when this is kind of the mechanism, and this is the heart of what I wanted to communicate about this program, and that is I use this program constantly. Well, I do have a lot of British Isles ancestors, so there's a reason for that. But I use this program constantly in helping other people with their research in England and the British Isles because it is extraordinarily helpful to use this technique to find out what you're really talking about when you start looking for an ancestor who was born or was supposedly born in England or one of the other British countries out there. Okay, so here what we have is kind of an extended search mechanism, search fields here. And the first thing I would suggest is to choose your country. So here you're going to choose England as the country. And this is just for an example. And then I'm going to put in a name. That's step one. So you're going to choose the country that you want to work with. And then you're going to go in here on step two and add a surname. And one thing that'll happen just very quickly with Findmypast is it will give you a results of the number of records they find with that surname. Now, there is a direct relationship between the number of records they find and the how popular or how frequently that particular surname shows up. And the range can be extraordinarily large. So some surnames in England, for example, I've had the lowest number I've ever had there was in the low hundreds. So there were 100 people in all of the millions and millions of records here on this program. There were only 100 people with that surname. And I would suggest to that person that you are definitely related to every single one of those people, and you better figure out how you are. The second thing I would do is you have surnames like my own surname, Tanner, that is, say, an occupation. And certainly all the Tanners are not related. And they are come from all different parts of England. And the number of names for a Tanner surname would be quite a bit higher, into the hundreds of thousands of people or records that reflect the Tanners. Common surnames, most of us can think of common English surnames like Smith and Jones and Brown and some other you might be really surprised with, but they can have results in the millions. Okay, so there's from low hundreds to the millions. Now, what does that do? When I look at the results here, I'm able to say pretty securely that there's 1,423 results for that family name. In this case, I've used a rather not very common name of DeFries, which is spelled a number of different ways. And I could have checked the name variants. I may have gotten more results if I had done that, because it could be DeVries with a V. It could be two words, DeFries, and it could be DeFries with an S. Those are variations that I know for that surname. But I wanted to illustrate here that this is a low number. In other words, when you see that number, that gives you some very important information about what I'm going to call it the level of difficulty of finding relatives, finding people who are genuinely, supportedly related to you. If you have a very, very common name with millions of people, then you have a completely different challenge out there in your genealogical research. And what this program has done for England and the British Isles is that it has enabled us to focus down on whether or not this is going to be a major issue of trying to come up with thousands of people with the same name, or if I'm going to find someone rather quickly with the program and have a high level of assurance that I have found the right person, despite the fact that the name, that perhaps the name is different. Okay, so the next step on this is I need to add some additional information. In this case, I'm adding a first name, a surname, a given name, and a middle name, Joseph George. And I'm also going to add in some a range of information about the birth. And you'll see there's a drop-down menu next to the birth date, which says plus or minus, plus 2 years. And if you drop that down, it's interesting because they have increments up to 40 years. So you can grab a pretty significant chunk of time, almost half a century of time, plus and minus will get you 80 years total finding anybody who was born within that range. So it can be overwhelming, and that's where you have to understand. Now, but the important thing here is I have put in some additional information about the place where I think this person was born, or where he died, or where something happened. In other words, where an event in this person's life occurred. And this is, in this case, I was pretty sure that he was from Stepney in London, in Middlesex, England. And it's important when you're doing this that you do this in this order. It may seem a little cumbersome. You can jump in and put all that information in the first time, but the problem you're going to run into with the program is that when you do that, you may not get the information exactly the way that it will show the correct results. So if you're not careful in selecting the country and then selecting a recognizable area, and over on the right side, a search radius that will give you the names within a geographical distance of that place, then you have some problems. Now, what happens if you don't know the place? Well, then that's the problem with most genealogical research, because the place is more important than anything else. Names, like I said, it's spelled different ways. Who knows? But the place is paramount, because that's what's going to be associated with the records, is the geographic location of the event. So it's more important to worry about having a correct place than it is worrying about having the name exactly correct. Although parameters, you've got to be within the range of variations on the name. So once you've done that, you'll see that the number of results dropped dramatically from about 1,000 down to about 10. So what's the chances of me being related to this Joseph George DeFries in those 10 results? Well, then we're going to look at the results. So now we're moving over here to step 4, which is to examine the results or view all the results. And now this is important to understand how this program works. Over on the left-hand side, there's a summary of the information that you've put in. So you can play around with that information. You can put in different spellings, and then you'll get immediate results. It's a totally interactive program. It'll tell you how many new numbers you have. It will show those results on the screen. And you can put in dates, changes. You can put in a death date, just an arbitrary year of an event in the person's life. And then you can also play around with the name of the location, bearing in mind that Findmypast is working off a standard list in England, of English and other countries that it deals with, place names. And you need to be careful to actually identify the place at the time that your event occurred, and understanding also that the jurisdictions, like counties, have been realigned fairly recently into the 1970s, when they realigned a lot of the counties in England. So and some of the things were renamed, and all sorts of things are happening. So it's important to understand your history and be aware of those when you're trying to come out with the names that you're looking for in this type of program. Now, when you do this, what happens in my case is that there he is. Now, how do I know he wasn't the first person? Because I knew he was born about 1822, but the first person up there is a Joseph George, and he's in 1821, and he's already in prison. He may have been born in 1821, and he was in prison, and he was in prison in 1871. Could this be my ancestor? As a matter of fact, it turns out to be possibly and likely that it was, that the 1821 and the 1822 are actually the same person. And this guy did get in trouble and did end up in prison. And another point about this is I haven't ever found out why, but it wasn't very long, and it was probably simply a matter of not paying a debt, and ended up in debtor's prison for a short period of time. But he was interesting because this person's occupation was feather merchant. He sold feathers. Okay, so maybe that's another problem. But there's a Joseph G, and he shows up in the 1881 census. And so you want to look down through all of these and see, and you'll find out that probably all those people listed there with the different places are, they may or may not be the same person because they're in different locations. And the helpful thing is to go through and put all of those locations on the right-hand side of the column on a map so that you can see how far is it from Bethel Green to West Harn, and how far is that from Whitechapel, and where is Stepney, and are those part of Stepney, or are they part of, where are they? And Shoreditch is another one. In other words, once you have them all in the map, then you'll be able to determine whether, well, maybe these aren't really the same ones because they're quite a bit away. And also there are, as the Joseph George married in 1842 in Whitechapel, and there's another Joseph George married in 1842 in Stepney. One of the things you need to remember was Whitechapel part of Stepney? See, and they may be exactly the same person. So when you start looking at the locations, it starts to sort out these people, and you'll be able to tell whether it's all the same person or move on to new. Now, this particular process of looking at and building on a search is not entirely unique with Findmypast, but it really has the best setup, the best organization of their search engines to give you this kind of results. You can try this with Family Search or Ancestry, or even with MyHeritage. You can try doing this, and you'll get a little bit of results. But sometimes in the other programs, the way that the search engines work, it actually backfires when you try to do this. You get less information than more specific information. So you have to be careful how you use this outside of Findmypast, but it is a fabulous way to take advantage of their records. And you can see how quickly I was able to cut down the numbers to something that was entirely manageable and find what probably is a number of records about the same individual, or if they're not, that may take a little bit of trouble. In the last week, I've spent considerable time working out some problems with some entries where there's two people with exactly the same name at exactly the same time period in a very small geographic area. And it makes it very difficult because over the years they've been confused, and so children show up in different families with different names with the different families and things that are identified wrong. So you need to be really careful, but Findmypast gives you kind of a real good way of getting into that information. Now, once you click on that and you have the record, you get the transcription of the record. So now you have the wife's name, which may also help you identify the right family, and you have the names of their children, and you'll see that you also have a Joseph George child who was born in 1844. So you're going to have that, and then you have a William who was born in 46, a Josiah in 48, and so forth. And you can see that they were consistently born in all these were born in different places. Chatham, the wife was born in Chatham, and one was born in or christened in. These are actually these could be birth records because there might be actually birth records rather than christening records. And you can see where they're born. That will also help you to identify which of the Joseph George's locations that are given in the previous record, which of those may be the same person or a different person. So you have to make that kind of a call or determination. So the next step, of course, is you can add that to your family tree, and that becomes a record that can be used then by the program to find additional records. One thing that's interesting is you might want to do the record hints before you do this process, because this record may already be in your record hints and you would have saved yourself the steps of having to go through and do a search for it. So by adding it to your tree, that helps you to kind of get past that. So one thing that's important about all of these programs, any program you go into that's an online database, meaning they have collections of genealogical records, or any of records for that matter, that may be helpful to genealogy. One of the first things you should need to understand is, and get a concept of, is what records they actually have. So you can go in here to the A to Z of the record sets and look at a list of all of the records on they have. In other words, once you click on that for the world, there's a list of every collection with all the numbers of records within those collections of all the records on this website. And what's the advantage of that is that you can determine quickly whether or not this particular website has records that you are interested in. So it's important to have those kinds of, to make that kind of a survey initially. And if you're starting maybe for using it one of the first few times you might want to use the program, and you have some people that you want to look up, this website obviously has records from other places around the world, and you may want to just look at the list, kind of browse through to see what countries they have and what records they have from those countries, so that you can make a determination if it even has those records. Now, the simplest way to find it, let's say, for example, you wanted to look for records in county where some of my ancestors lived, and that's county in eastern Arizona called Apache County. Would this website have any records from Apache County? Well, the simple thing to do is search to see if there are any Apache County records, and I can probably guess that they don't have any. And you can go to the other websites, the other big websites that have big databases, and make the same kind of search, and you might be surprised. You don't want to spend your time searching or working with the website for that particular ancestor and that particular location if they don't really have any records. So be sure and search this out. Check to see whether or not the website even has the records that you're interested in looking at. And then you can search for a specific collection if you need to. If you want to know if they have any records for a specific location within England, then you can start searching for that special collection. Now, one thing you need to know about English records, and I think it's important to mention that with this website, is that many of the records in England, and particularly records, vital records of some kind, and parish registers and things like that, are owned by the governmental and ecclesiastical possessors, the archives of those records. So, for example, you can find a transcript of a parish register on Findmypast, but you may not be able to see the original record because it's owned by the parish, and they want to license and use the images to make some money off of the records. And the same thing goes with the records from the country, from English records. Many of the records, for instance, you can get a transcription of some of the marriage and birth records, but in order to get a copy of the original record, you may need to contact the record office in England online and order the record and pay for it. So this is not the end of finding records, depending on the way the country handles the records that they have. So that happens in in a lot of countries. It's happening more frequently as time goes on, as the countries recognize that monetizing their records, charging for copies, is a revenue source. So that's what happens. You also, on MyHeritage, as you begin to add records to your family tree, can get a record summary of, or a list of all of the people for which you have added records, and basically all the people, all the records. So this gives you a cumulative list of all the records that you have. And over on the right-hand side, you'll see I've highlighted a section over there, and you'll see that there's a way to edit, to look at images if the images exist, or look at the transcription if there's a transcription of the records. So those are kind of the ways. Many, many more records transcribed than we have images for, just because of the restrictions that I spoke of a moment ago. Now you want to remember the British Empire. Whenever you're doing, get involved here with England and the British Isles, you need to understand the British Empire, because all of the records for the British Empire were in England. And the records for these countries that were in the colonial part of the British Empire are in English, and they're their records. So you'll find out that there's all of these different areas are, they have records from all these countries out here, all of these British Empire countries. So some of the places where you might have a lot of difficulty, thinking you're going to have a lot of difficulty in finding new records or finding records at all, you may find out that simply going to Findmypast will solve that problem. A good example of that is India. In fact, I have a friend whose family is English family, English-speaking family, came from India, and she uses this website extensively to do research in the Indian occupation records, the records from India when the British were there. Now, the question would be, what about the native population of the countries? Not so much. So that's another problem and another challenge. So this is, but this is important to recognize that they have this. And also historical records from earlier colonies. You recall, of course, that the United States, before it became an independent country, was a British colony, and the land was acquired from England during the Revolutionary War, obviously, and we end up with states. And the earlier records before 1776, when the war started, and sort of the cutoff date, it's not really the date that you can use to use records, but that's sort of a record used by just kind of a rule of thumb. But you need to understand that some of those records previously, even though they were kept here, were English records, they were British records, and it's very possible that there are records in the British archives of the places that existed previously, like the colonies, the 13 colonies. I spoke a moment ago about record hints. I'd like to say a little bit more about the record hints. Those are those dots that appear on the family tree. You'll also remember perhaps that they showed up on the profile and on the summary of the individual's information, and put in the information that you click on that to see what those records are. And then just make sure that you evaluate the records. If you come up with a William Parkinson who lives in Lancashire, you can assure you that that isn't the William Parkinson. So let me show you what happens when you do that. So when you, let me go back and explain what happens. So for example, you may find that there's a William Parkinson in Lancashire, and a William Parkinson in another county where your person's from. So when you look at that person who was from Herefordshire or from whichever other county it is, you have to make sure that you're not confusing the two. Just because the names are the same, the birth dates are the same, the wife's name may even be the same, or the husband's name may be the same. You have to be very careful to look at the places and all the places where the children were supposed to have been born. Let's say you go through a list of children in the family, and you find out that there's a child born in Middlesex, and the second child born in Middlesex, and the third child's born in Middlesex. We're talking about the early 1700s. And as a matter of fact, what happens at that point is that the family, you think, well, this is Middlesex, 1700s, and then the next child is born in Lancashire. Okay, so how far is Lancashire from Middlesex? That's where you have to make the question. And then you have to look at the date and see that that date may not be consistent with anyone traveling from London up to Lancashire to have a baby. And if one of the people in the family or two of the people in the family were born in counties that are not consistent with where the parents were married and where they died, where they were born, then as further you go back in time, the more likely it is that those people are not part of that family, and they've been simply added because they had the same surname and someone didn't bother to look at where they were born or where the events in their family occurred. Now, there's always exceptions, and when you have to deal with those exceptions, if you find out that someone moved around for a while. Even back in the 1700s, there were people who did move, who did travel from area to area within the country. They were called travelers. They were usually either gypsies, or they may have been merchants who did a circuit, and they may very well have had family in different parts of the country, but you need to determine that by doing your research. Now, every one of these programs has started their own DNA program, and Findmypast has DNA, but it is focused primarily on England and the British Isles, and so this is, I guess, a judgment call. If you think that if most of your research is going to be in this area, then you may want to get a DNA test from a company that focuses primarily on that part of the world. Now, I think it's important also to mention at this point that Findmypast has some very extensive records from other parts of the world. The part of the world that those records come from is lately, over the last few years, they've been adding a lot of records from the United States. One of the record sets that Findmypast was able to add from the United States that Family Search or anyone else has not been able to access or get was Catholic records from the eastern part of the United States, and historical Catholic records. And one of the things that Findmypast has done is been adding millions and millions of these Catholic parish register records and diocese records from the eastern seaboard, from New York and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and other states. And they continue to add millions of these records of primarily of Catholics in New England and all down the seaboard. So this is very surprising, and that's why I said look at the catalog and find the records and find out if they have the records, and they may have some surprises. Those records from India, I've always somewhat surprised to find that they have a huge collection of records from India and South Africa and Australia, as I pointed out on the map, that there's New Zealand, and they have records from all of those places that you may have difficulty finding others. As a matter of fact, not, but from India, yes, it might be difficult to find any of the Indian records of the British occupation outside of Findmypast. You may want to also upload other companies' test results so that you can get more information. There's a couple of things on the website that you might want to explore. One is the History Hub. They have a lot of really interesting articles and documents on various wars and involvements and cultural things that happened in and around. So you can really get into some information. They also have a Findmypast community. You can get involved in polls and surveys and all sorts of information from people around the world. It's a little more on the entertainment side than on the research side, but it also always makes family history a little more interesting. And if you don't know a lot of information about these events and how they occurred and what happened to your ancestors, if they did live in these countries, is also very important. Okay, well, thanks for watching. This time, I just encourage you to understand that each of these major programs have their prominently important, unique records. Many people say, well, don't they have all the same records? No, not by a long shot. You can find U.S. Census records on Findmypast, as well as on all the other major websites. But once you start getting into parish registers and all these various lots of different kinds of British records, for example, you'll find that Findmypast is an extremely valuable website. Okay, well, do we have any questions that anybody wants to ask at this point? Ryan?
Awesome. Thanks, James. It looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat box already. The first one says, can you print off your whole family tree / family history that you have entered into Findmypast so that you have a family history book to share with your family?
Sorry to laugh, but why would you want to do that? Anyway, yes, well, you can do some print. I think you can print the forms. I haven't tried to do that. I'm sorry if I kind of glossed over that. I once, some years ago, many years ago, I was always under the, always wanted to print it off because I don't know why, but I printed it off because it's there on the computer. But I decided to print it off, and I calculated what it would take. And at that point in time, it was in the neighborhood of, it was going to take something like 16,000 pages to print what was in my family tree. So yeah, it just depends. Obviously, there's some reasons to print things off so you can, have it in your hands and mark it up and take notes on it if you wish to do that. But I think you'll find that it may be impractical in some instances to do that. I know that's not very satisfying, but it is kind of the reality now that we do what we do online. And it can be accessed, by the way, they have apps to access on mobile and all sorts of ways. So, but
Great.
Yeah, I would assume, I'm sorry, I can't, in fact, I'd never thought of that because I don't ever print, ever.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, and we have another question. It says, can you type a biography for each family member in this program?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can add notes. You can add a lot of information about the family if you want to put that in there. Yeah, there's a lot more that I can't cover in an hour, so that's why I suggest you explore the program, because it is, there's a lot of features there that are very important.
Awesome. And we also have a question from Steve. It says, do they only deal with the British Isles or all of the British Empire?
No, I hope I was clear. I'm not, I'll have to repeat it if I'm not, but yes, they have records from all of the British Empire and all the colonies and everything. It's extremely extensive, millions and millions and millions of records. But there are some holes. The biggest holes in the records are the parish registers, simply because the parishes lock up their records and don't share them. They want to get the revenue from the records, so they aren't available directly in all cases. But the coverage is extensive, and that's not something you run into too often until you get really, if you're doing extensive amount of English research, you'll find out that you need to have a budget for obtaining copies from the various agencies, including the parishes and the government.
Great. And then we have another question, and it says, can you transfer your DNA test from another database to here?
I think I had a note that says you can upload your raw data from another test. I'm not sure what kind of limitations they have on that, because another, they basically, their DNA testing is really new. It's probably been maybe a little bit more than a year since they began supporting DNA tests, and it's it has, they basically have contracted with an outside company in England to provide the tests.
Awesome. And this next question might have just been answered, but I'm going to read it anyway. It says, I have DNA results from 23andMe. Would it be worth it to also get DNA from Findmypast?
If you have English ancestors, if they're from the British Isles, English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, the answer to that is yes, it would be worth it, because you would be able to, and especially, let me kind of preface this with having a DNA test from any one of these companies gives you some information right out the bat. Whether that's helpful information depends on you, and it depends on the extent to which you have a researched family tree available on that website. So if you have a 23andMe and you have a family tree and you have a lot of your relatives listed, then it's going to be helpful. If you have a DNA test from any of the companies, Findmypast, MyHeritage, Ancestry, whatever, unless you have a family tree on that program, that DNA test is not going to do you a whole lot of good. You may get matches with people, but it's going to be, without a family tree, how do you determine how you're related to these people? They're all living people. So how are you going to know who they are and how you're related? But the programs themselves, because of the extensive family trees that are associated, can suggest ways, in some cases, how you're related. So yeah, there's a value in having your family tree from more than one company, and also your DNA test.
Great. And Frank asks, when and what is the topic for the next BYU webinar? I can answer that, Frank. It's next Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. It's going to be with Bonnie Belza, and the title is How to Ask Your DNA Question. And we will give about 10 more seconds for any last questions in the chat.
Okay, well,
all right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, James. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And like I just said, it doesn't show on the schedule right here, but next week, join us next week with Bonnie Belza, How to Ask Your DNA Question. And so be sure to join us for that. We hope to see you there, and have a great day.